Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a topic that's, well, bigger than most, the state of Texas. I mean, from its absolutely massive landscapes to its pretty wild history, we are going to unpack what makes the Lone Star State so, well, so Texas. So, let's kick things off with a number that really puts everything into perspective. We're talking over 250,000 square miles. That makes Texas the biggest of the 48 contiguous states. To give you an idea, that's nearly 9% of the entire U.S. mainland. And that scale, that sheer size, it's not just a fun fact. It's the foundation for everything else we're about to talk about. All right, so how are we going to tackle this giant? Well, here's the game plan. We're going to look at its immense scale, then dive into its environmental extremes. After that, we'll get into its turbulent history, meet the diverse people who call it home, and finally, track its ever-changing economy, from cattle all the way to computers. Okay, first up, let's really wrap our heads around that size. Because in Texas, being big isn't just something to brag about. It fundamentally shapes every single thing, from its natural resources to its culture. I mean, this huge state is just crisscrossed with rivers and streams, about 3,700 of them. You've got absolute giants like the Rio Grande, which forms that famous border with Mexico, and the Brazos, which cuts right across the state. But here's the thing. For all that water, you can't really navigate most of these rivers for any serious distance. And this, right here, is one of the state's biggest paradoxes. If you fly over Texas, it looks like it's got water everywhere, with almost 200 major reservoirs sparkling below. But the truth is, a lot of the land is incredibly dry, and almost all of those lakes are man-made. They had to build them, to control and store water because it's such a precious resource in a very thirsty land. Now, all that size doesn't just create different landscapes. It also means Texas is a state defined by some really dramatic and sometimes pretty violent contrasts when it comes to climate. So, the key to understanding all of this is a geological fault line called the Balcones Escarpment. And it's not just some ridge, it's a literal dividing line that slices the state in two. Everything to the east is kind of like the Old South, and everything to the west is that rugged, dry terrain you picture when you think of the West. And this table just lays it all out, clear as day. Look at this. In the east, you get a humid, coastal-type climate with over 56 inches of rain a year. But then you cross that escarpment, head west, and bam, it's a dry, continental climate with less than 8 inches. It's like two completely different worlds inside a single state border. And this divide isn't just about rain. It's about temperature, too. The records show a staggering 143-degree difference between the coldest day and the hottest day ever recorded in Texas. You could literally feel like you're in the Midwest, up in the Panhandle, and then be in a subtropical zone down by the Rio Grande. It's wild. And with these extremes comes some truly destructive weather. The Galveston hurricane back in 1900 is still the deadliest natural disaster in all of U.S. history. And on top of that, a huge chunk of the state sits smack in the middle of Tornado Alley, which has seen unbelievably catastrophic storms, like the one that hit Waco in '53. So you've got this volatile landscape, and it turns out it's a perfect match for an equally turbulent history. It's a story defined by conflict, constantly shifting loyalties, and this just fierce, independent spirit. Just look at this timeline. I mean, it is a whirlwind. In less than 200 years, Texas goes from being this remote colonial outpost to a Mexican province, then it fights a war to become its own independent country. Just 9 years later, it joins the U.S., only to leave and join the Confederacy 16 years after that. Talk about constant dramatic change. The Texas Revolution itself, it's interesting. It started as a fight over constitutional rules, mostly because of the centralist policies of the Mexican president, Santa Anna. But things escalated really, really fast. The fall of the Alamo became this incredibly powerful symbol of sacrifice, and it fired up the Texan army, who then pulled off a shocking victory at San Jacinto just weeks later. And that victory, that's what secured independence for the brand new Republic of Texas. So all this history of conflict and colonization and migration, it ended up creating a demographic landscape that is truly unique and changing faster than almost anywhere else. Even the name Texas has a pretty amazing story. It actually comes from its original inhabitants. When Spanish explorers showed up, they heard the Caddo people call themselves Taishas, which meant allies or friends. The Spanish wrote that down as Tejas, and that eventually became Texas. Okay, fast forward to the 21st century, and all those different waves of migration have totally transformed the state. Texas became what's called a minority majority state, which is one of the most diverse places in the entire country where no single ethnic group actually makes up an absolute majority. And check out this number, 22.8%. That's how much the state's population grew in just one decade, between 1990 and 2000. That population boom was so massive that it's when Texas officially passed New York to become the second most populous state in the whole country. And, of course, all those new people fueled an economy that was also going through some massive changes. The story of modern Texas is really a story of incredible economic evolution, built on three very different pillars over time. For a long, long time, the Texas economy really came down to this number, the number of cattle in the state. The famous cattle drives after the Civil War, that's what created the whole myth of the Texas cowboy. And even today, Texas is still #1 in the nation for cattle. But then, everything changed. One day, January 10th, 1901 to be exact, a well at a place called Spindletop absolutely blew, and that gusher launched the oil and petrochemical industries that would just dominate the Texas economy for the next 100 years and fuel so much of its growth. And that brings us closer to today. The economy has shifted again. Now, oil and gas are still hugely important, don't get me wrong, but high-tech industries, in places like Austin's Silicon Hills, and the service sector have become massive economic drivers, creating a much more diverse and modern economic foundation. So, when you put it all together, Texas, a state built on being the biggest and having these huge contrasts, it just keeps reinventing itself. It's gone from a frontier republic to an agricultural giant to an energy behemoth, and now to a high-tech hub. And this constant change, this evolution, is what makes its future so fascinating. It just leaves you wondering, what on earth is the next chapter for Texas going to be?